A man spends months growing something, risking weather, soil, his own money. When it's finally ready, he can still end up with surprisingly little control over what he gets paid for it. That's exactly what happened to Jeremy Clarkson on a farm in Oxfordshire. 16 tons of potatoes, a folding table by the road. The whole setup brought in £5.35. 16 tons of potatoes. £5.35. We assume whoever makes something controls what it's worth. This video is about why that's often wrong. Making the product is one kind of power. Having customers already asking for it is another. By the end, you'll know how to look at any business and spot the difference. Who makes the product? And who already has customers asking for it? Most people watching this already know Clarkson from the car show. Forget that for a second. Focus on the potatoes. He grew way more than he could ever sell through that little roadside stand. And it wasn't because the farming failed him. The crop was fine. The problem showed up after the crop was already fine. He had a product. He just didn't have a way to reach enough buyers on his own terms. That's really the question this video is asking. It was never about whether the farm could grow the food. The potatoes were already there. It was about who decides what happens to something once you've made it. If you like seeing the hidden systems behind the businesses, brands, and money you walk past every day, that's what this channel is about. Picture the scene. A metal filing cabinet turned into a cash box, sitting on a folding table at the edge of a field. 16 tons of potatoes somewhere behind it, going nowhere. 16 tons is about the weight of 10 cars. £5.35 is barely enough for a coffee and a pastry. The farm had actually grown a huge crop that year, tens of tons, by its own later account. But growing it was never the hard part. Moving it was. So eventually, Clarkson did the obvious thing. He opened a proper farm shop. Suddenly the potatoes, and the lamb, and the honey, and everything else the farm made, had somewhere real to be sold, directly, to people who'd driven out just to buy them. It sounds like a small fix. It wasn't. It was the first version of something much bigger. Instead of hoping someone further down the chain would buy his crop, he built a way to reach the customer himself. Zoom out from Clarkson for a second, because this isn't only his story. In 2026, the UK government reviewed farm profitability and found the same basic problem. In parts of the food chain, farmers simply have less bargaining power than the people buying from them. The review pushed for fairer, more transparent deals between farmers and buyers. Picture a farmer with a genuinely good harvest, who still has surprisingly little power to negotiate the price he's offered. Not because the harvest failed, but because the buyer may hold more of the power in that conversation. Growing something well was never the guarantee people assume it is. The real risk shows up later, in who controls what happens between the farm and the customer. That's Clarkson's actual problem. Once you strip away the tractors and the TV cameras, the product was his. The relationship with the customer wasn't. Once you see it that way, his next move stops looking like a TV stunt and starts looking like a pretty logical response to a real weak spot in his business. Cattle make this even clearer than the potatoes do. An animal raised on a farm doesn't just turn into beef on a plate. Raising it alone can take the better part of 2 years. Then it still needs a licensed slaughterhouse, a butcher, refrigerated trucks, and somewhere willing to put it on a menu or a shelf, all before it ever reaches a customer. None of that goes away just because a farmer wants to sell direct. So when Clarkson tried to sell more of his own beef, on his own terms, he wasn't cutting out that whole chain. He was trying to control more of it, and put himself, not someone else, closest to the customer. That ambition led somewhere new. A restaurant. Not just a shelf in a shop, but a destination. A place where the food, the farm, and the whole story around them showed up on the same plate. If it worked, it would turn diddly squat from a producer selling into a system he didn't control, into a place people chose to come to, on his terms. It didn't happen cleanly. The restaurant plan ran straight into planning law. An independent planning inspector agreed there'd been a real, harmful breach of planning rules around the restaurant, even though a related parking permission was allowed to stand. This wasn't some simple story of a farmer against an evil council. It was a real legal fight, and Clarkson didn't just win it outright. Turns out, building a direct route from farm to customer wasn't only a business problem, it was a legal one too. What opened instead was a pub, The Farmer's Dog, built around food that's as local and as British as Clarkson could manage. He's admitted that commitment makes the place harder to run at a profit. That British first sourcing policy just isn't the cheapest way to fill a kitchen. It opened in August 2024. Hundreds of people showed up. Not because the location was convenient. It wasn't. It was because of who was attached to it. And that detail matters more than almost anything else in this story. Ask the honest question. Were those hundreds of people lining up for the beef or for Clarkson? Honestly, both. But that queue existed in the first place because of decades on television, a famous face, and an audience most farms will never have. That's the one advantage ordinary farmers just can't copy. Not the only reason the business works, but the one thing no roadside stand or small farm shop can ever match. An ordinary farmer can't just open a shop tomorrow and expect this. Clarkson didn't just produce food. He showed up with a built-in audience, already paying attention to whatever he did next. Keep that in mind, because it's about to matter even more. What happened next didn't come from the beef at all. It came from something almost accidental. Barley. Some of the spring barley from Diddley Squat went into a lager. Clarkson helped build the brand. It's called Hawkstone, though company records list him as a significant shareholder, not the sole owner. In the year to March 2024, Hawkstone brought in £7.8 million in sales. The year after that, roughly £21.3 million. The year after that, £44.9 million. That's sales, not profit, not beef, and not money landing straight in Clarkson's own pocket. But that growth curve alone tells you something big is happening. Barley, as a raw material, is worth roughly whatever the market says grain is worth that week. Nobody walks into a shop asking for it by name. A beer with a name, a face, a story, and an audience is worth something completely different, because people don't just buy it, they go looking for it. Put an anonymous, unbranded lager next to a beer people already love, and only one of them gets asked for by name at the bar. Now, the barley wasn't the only thing adding value here. Malting, brewing, packaging, and distribution all played a real part too. But once people are actively asking for your brand, you've got a lot more power over what happens to that value. That's the whole mechanism of this video, sitting right there in a pint glass. To be fair to the numbers, Hawkstone started out with barley grown at Diddley Squat. As it grew, it started sourcing British barley more widely too, from growers around the country. That actually makes the point stronger, not weaker. The brand got big enough that one farm couldn't supply it anymore. Clarkson hadn't just sold beer, he'd built demand big enough to outgrow his own field. Here's the twist. The simple version of this story always leaves out. By 2025, Hawkstone was on shelves at Waitrose, Morrison's, Sainsbury's and Ocado. The very supermarket world Clarkson had spent years appearing to escape. By 2026, it was in major supermarket channels and still expanding. Now, UK regulators have found that grocery retailers usually run on operating margins under 3%. That doesn't make supermarkets innocent, it just tells you something narrower. The gap between what a farmer gets paid and what you pay at the till isn't simply going into supermarket profit. There's still a real, separate problem. Farmers having less bargaining power in parts of the food chain. And that's a completely different issue. The man who once couldn't sell his own potatoes was now selling through the biggest retailers in the country. But this time, the supermarket shelf wasn't his only way to reach a customer. He didn't have to permanently avoid the supermarket to win. He had to stop needing the supermarket to create the demand. The first time around, he was just a farmer hoping someone would buy his crop. The second time, Hawkstone came back to major retail, already carrying an established brand, real sales numbers, and people who already knew and wanted it. Nobody outside the room knows exactly what was said in any negotiation with any retailer. But from the outside, it's clear his position had changed. Same shelf, a very different starting point. Before this turns into a fantasy, let's be honest about the limits. Most farmers can't do this. Clarkson didn't just have a farm. He had decades of TV exposure and a nationwide audience that most businesses spend their whole existence trying to build. That part of the story doesn't scale down to a normal farm. What does scale down is the idea underneath it. A creator who depends entirely on one platform has the same basic weakness Clarkson had with his potatoes. So does a manufacturer who only sells through one marketplace. If you make the thing but don't own the relationship with the customer, you're exposed in the same way. And if you want to keep learning how to spot that difference, in the businesses around you, the ones that just make things, and the ones that actually own who wants them, that's exactly what this channel is for. Go back to the start of this video. A man grows something, risking weather, soil, his own money, and can still end up with surprisingly little control over what he gets paid for it. That feels unfair, because we assume making the thing should be where the value comes from. Clarkson's farm doesn't prove that's always wrong. It just shows you clearly how it can fall apart. From now on, when you look at any business, a brand, a farm, a creator, a company you've never thought twice about, ask two separate questions instead of one. Who makes this? And separately, who owns the demand for it? A lot of the time, those aren't the same answer. And when they're not, that gap tells you a lot about where the bargaining power actually sits. Clarkson's most important move was never just avoiding a supermarket. It was building a world where people came looking for his products, instead of depending on someone else to create the market for them. The potatoes taught him the problem. The beer taught him the fix. Making something creates value, but once people are already asking for what you sell, you have a lot more power over what happens to that value next. That's the shift worth remembering, long after this video ends.